folks. You're listening to The Idea Roastery. I'm Herman.
I'm Jason.
So, Jason, in the world right now, we're at that peak of technological progress. We're moving really fast and breaking some things. And in this world of constant change, learning new things is arguably a very important skill to have, the skill of learning new skills. And so I pose to you this question: how do you learn new skills?
I guess part of the topic is whether it is going to be important to learn things or whether it's going to be important to teach machines to learn things. And I guess in the same sense, it very much depends on the type of thing that you want to learn. I think when it comes, we could talk about the different types of things that you can learn. I've got a few ideas of where to take the topic. If it's something that's adjacent to what I know, like learning a new programming language or learning how to do something for the first time, a typical approach is just to like try it out and be practical in trying to figure it out. But I've realized recently that doesn't work always for every type of learning you need to do, right? So recently I've been sort of learning about the climate tech industry, and I've been learning about sort of manufacturing and some of these other industries. And it's an area where I have very little sort of nubs to sort of grow from, if that makes sense. And so it's been a process of expansion and then contraction, right? So the way I think about it is I try and learn a lot about a lot of different things to kind of get a vibe or like a sort of overview of the space. And then once I pick up on a few topics, then it's about like zoning into them. So the tangible process is more like just watching videos, going to events, going to conferences, trying to learn, like trying to speak to people, chat about things, go on Reddits and stuff like that. And then once you get a sort of nub of an idea, then you kind of like follow it down into like, let me explore deeper into this area, or let me sort of try and find a PDF report about it and just go down into that rabbit hole. But I guess it really depends on the type of learning that you need to do. How about you? What's your process?
I think it's similar to you. I actually wrote an article recently about how I learn crafty skills, or like programming, whether it's a new programming language or framework, or something like woodworking and leatherworking, which as we spoke about last week, I've recently done. And so I tend to break that down into two steps. And the first one is just understanding the scope of what is possible, right? So that would be things like figuring out what the jargon is. You know, all of these different things have their own way that people communicate about them. And so this can be done in the form of, like, as you said, watching YouTube videos and going to conferences and speaking to people. And this gives you an understanding of the context space in which to operate, right? And then after that, I really want to get my hands dirty because, you know, I learn really well through doing. And so if this were, let's take, for instance, a programming language, I would do a small project that is like self-contained, where I try to touch as many facets of the language as possible in as short a period of time as possible. So I'm not going, let's take, for instance, I'm trying to learn Rust, right? I'm not going to try to build something big like a social media platform in Rust. Instead, I will build Snake that runs in the terminal in Rust, right? And this gives me access to, you know, how packages work over there and how the syntax looks, and et cetera, et cetera. And so that's how I tend to just approach things in general. And this applies to woodworking. You know, you need to know what a miter saw is and what it does, and you have to understand what a bevel is and what countersunk joinery is. Even if you don't necessarily know how to do it yourself, you understand what that is, and then later you can go and learn it yourself when you put together the cabinet and hopefully keep all of your fingers.
So in the digital sense, when you're picking a project, do you pick something that you know relatively like well how to do it in a different format, or do you go with something that's a little bit outside? And it kind of, I guess, it touches on the like your wider context. Like, how do you know if it's possible, if what you're doing is going to be too time consuming, or is it just more like picking a project that you would like to see the output of?
I think with that it's kind of vibes based, to be
Yeah,
honest. Is that uh, with programming, I mean, I've been a programmer for 11, 12
yeah,
years now, and so I have a pretty good grasp of what is possible in a programming space and like what is complexity and what isn't complexity.
mm-hmm,
So, for example, when I was mentoring at a startup incubator, a lot of people had big plans to build asymmetric marketplaces like your Airbnbs and your Ubers and stuff like that. Thinking that, oh, this is really simple because, uh, it's just two different CRUD apps that talk
mm-hmm,
to the same database. And it's like, there's a lot more that goes into a asymmetric
yeah,
marketplace than, just data inputs. There's, the actual building of the markets and the chicken and egg
mm.
problem. No, sorry, you wouldn't call it the chicken and egg problem.
It's like the bootstrap problem, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, so I think in that case, I'm kind of
Mm-hmm,
cheating, because I understand the problem space fairly well. But the fact of the matter is that, like, if you're interested in learning something from, a couple hours of YouTube videos, you can get a pretty decent idea of what is possible and what
mm-hmm,
isn't. So, let's take, for instance, something completely out there. You're learning how to dance
mm-hmm,
salsa, right? Or you want to learn how to dance salsa. Well, you can go and watch a few
mm-hmm,
YouTube videos on, how to go about learning salsa dancing, and it'll give you some pretty good advice on how to do that. Um, and when you watch it, you know that you're not going to be like those salsa dancers on stage, like spinning each other
mm-hmm,
about and throwing the woman up in the air and catching them and bippity boppity boom. Um, but you understand what is possible, and then there's also that knowledge that, okay, I have to go and do a couple of salsa lessons, and
mm-hmm,
then the best way to advance in salsa is to go to salsa parties and just dance with many people again and again, and also get over that like fear of messing up,
mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. Um, so what's your take on that outside of a programming space?
Well, so yeah, I was gonna bring it more to like a more general principle. Like, so when it came to learning the craft, like woodworking, uh, I think it's good that people realize that courses and lessons are like very useful for this, because
Super useful.
one thing I've noticed is when it comes to crafts, like learning guitar, learning lessons, like or taking lessons for salsa, like I recently did like a DJ course. Um, People often see them as like you need to be like the struggling artist and you need to like learn it yourself and you need to read through books and like or you need to like play guitar enough times to like get the basics and then you become like Led Zeppelin or something like that. But I think people often overlook courses and they overlook learning from others because I guess maybe also because the internet is such a vast place and people are like, oh, I can just learn it on YouTube. But I feel like the tangibility of having like an expert tell you what to do is really important. But without that, like, where did you start with woodworking? Because I like, you obviously had some skills with woodworking. Uh, like everyone's kind of picked up a saw maybe before, but did you go to a book? Did you like read some basics of like
Hmm.
different joins or like what was the process? Or did you just start with Google? Like where did you go from?
So first I completely agree with you that people tend to underestimate learning from someone else, right? It's like us apes together strong,
Mm,
right? We're social animals and we learn very well from one another. And I think it's also very possible to learn things incorrectly while doing it online without a guide to kind of say like actually put your feet like this. And so I think that, yeah, definitely if you have the opportunity to, especially if you're learning like a musical instrument or a language or something like that, definitely have someone show you the ropes. I mean, like not every great, but the vast majority of great pianists all had teachers. Very few of them, if any of them, just kind of started playing piano, right? So remind me of what your question was.
So where do you start? Like, do you like you did you look at a book, or you
Yeah.
just went, or did you just go into a course? Because one other thing that I've tried to do is just like find. So one thing I did, I didn't do it this year, but I used to do like an online course, like one of these more structured sort of paid for courses at the beginning of the year, and that was to like supplement my knowledge base, right? So it's like I did like IT management, or I did like a MBA essentials course, and I did like a sustainability course, and it's kind of like each time it was something that I kind of knew that
Mm.
I wanted to learn. But have you ever done a course that you've like had not like knew nothing about, like you went in completely cold, or have you ever learned anything that was like completely outside of your wheelhouse?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a great question because with woodworking, like I've always grown up in a house that I had to do very practical things. Like I've, repaired doors with hammer and nails, and we went to scouts where you lashed wooden poles together and
Yeah,
erected tables. And it's not the same as making furniture, but it is a form of like, okay, here's how you make flat surface out of
yeah,
unconnected pieces of wood. So going into woodworking, like yes, I didn't know how to do joins, but I watched a bunch of like, those woodworking videos online that are just
oh
super
yeah,
ASMR, and so you kind of get
oh
like
yeah, yeah.
good context over there of what is possible, even if it is a bit advanced. Um, in terms of learning something that was completely out of my wheelhouse, so I did some salsa. Sorry, not some salsa, salsa as well, but I did Spanish lessons last year. Um, so spent a bit of time kicking around Spain quite a few years ago, and just got like the enough to figure out how to not die.
Mm,
And then when Emma and I were heading to the Canary Islands beginning of last year, we decided, hey, let's like properly learn some salsa so we can get around over there, which is kind of funny because we didn't like the Canary Islands that much and ended up going to Bali after a short period of
oh
time
yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but so I did the usual things. Like I tried out Duolingo, and to be entirely honest, I don't think
yeah. Mm,
Duolingo is very good at teaching Spanish. I think languages
mm,
are one of those things that's very much picked up in context. And so the best way to learn it is in context where you're actively speaking to another person, as opposed to doing
mm.
drills, right? Um,
Yeah,
and I think
yeah.
a secondary thing to that is textbook learning of languages is also not very good because it's just another form of drills and it's trying to teach you rules.
Mm,
Whereas while language does have rules, we as humans don't learn language through rules, right? Like when you learned how to
mm,
talk when you were a baby, it's not because you knew that the verb goes here in a sentence and it is predicated by the, pronoun, etc., etc. You just learn
mm,
how to speak, and then later when you go to high school, then the rules all fit into place. And so
mm,
learning learning a new language was very
mm.
challenging. Um, but
Yeah.
it was a twice weekly call with a Spanish dude, and he
Hmm.
did do a bunch of the textbook type learning, which I personally didn't
Mm,
find great, but just the fact that there was someone there to, prompt you and to correct you and to catch you in the mistakes that you make again and again and again, because there are sometimes like mistakes that you will carry on making, whether it's pronunciation
mm,
or uh, shifting words around where they're not supposed to be. Um, and my Spanish is okay. I mean, it's not great, but like
mm.
I'll find my way around Spain, or
Yeah.
a decent amount of South America. And that was only from, I think 2 or 3 months of lessons, and not
Mm.
much learning otherwise. So can recommend.
And did you like? uh, do you ever think of learning in and of itself, like where you're thinking like I need to challenge myself to learn something new? I know I did it like well quite recently when I quit my job. Is I noticed that I wasn't learning as rapidly, and that was more an introspection of my current rate of learning. And I said I need to learn at a quicker rate, right?
Hmm.
And do you ever think about it in terms of like, hey, I haven't learned something new in a while?
Or sort of like meta learning.
Yeah, like it's a bit meta, but and maybe as software developers, we're like learning just by the fact we're trying to build stuff. But you ever just see it like, hey, I want to like challenge myself in a different domain. I want to challenge myself in a different. It seems like you're doing it anyway because you've done a craft and you. I think you said earlier the year you like relearned maths. You like
Yeah.
did a lot of like these kind of things, and you challenging it in different formats, or is it just like I want to do this. I need to learn the stuff that I need to do this, and I'm gonna just do that.
I'm actually really interested in learning how to learn well, right? Because I think that things are changing fairly fast, and it's also there's it it makes you interesting in conversation. You know more about the world. You
Mm,
have a firmer grasp on the things that are going on around you. And also learning's fun. Like
mm,
learning's pretty neat. It expands who you are. One of the things that has been interesting over the past year is, as you know, um, a friend of mine, Eric, and I tried to start a company. Well, I guess we did start a company. We just only have one client
mm,
um, that makes chatbots for education. So, like
mm,
Socratic tutors that try and help you through your mathematics homework or something like that.
mm,
And what's been really interesting, watching the interactions between students and chatbot, and also seeing other research come out around AI assisted learning, is that it's actually not good, right? Is a fundamental part of learning is being in that uncomfortable zone of not knowing and struggling and then overcoming that. And the problem with having an AI assistant, even if it is in a limited context, or even if it is in a Socratic context where it doesn't give you answers but tries to nudge you along, is that it takes you out of that discomfort and it immediately gives you a next step or a solution, and it takes away that cognitive bandwidth that I believe is necessary for doing good learning. I also saw students just really trying to abuse the chatbot. They'll just like take a picture of their
yeah.
entire homework and just say like, give me homework answers. And then
Yeah.
the chatbot will be like, oh, I see at number 1.1 that they do this. Do you want to try and figure out how many eggs Sally has in each of their hands? No. Well, and because
Mm,
chatbots are infinitely patient, they'll sit there and, you know, take your abuse and still try and nudge you along. Another piece of
mm,
research that came out was uh, AI assisted learning was I forget the exact context of it, but they had a control group, and they did both assignments and tests, and the people with AI assistants obviously did better in the assignments, but they ended up doing worse on uh, tests without an AI assistant, which I guess we could
mm,
have predicted the result of that. Um, but it's been really interesting to think about that. And when I think about it in my own context, like I'm the kind of person when I read a nonfiction book, I take notes. I've got a big text file on my computer where I
mm,
just like, most books are only like, 5 or 6 centimeters worth of notes. Not a lot, but it's just the important bits and
mm.
pieces that I can take away from it. And I just find that that's a better way for me to retain that information. I like to be able to retain information, be able to call that up again later, you know?
Yeah. So the first thing that resonates is like I've also seen I don't know studies or whatever where it's like the act of surprise something in the brain like triggers it to learn that, right? So if you ever have like a presentation for instance and you ask people like a hypothetical question and they get it
A
wrong,
surprising
then
question.
they remember the answer a lot better than if you were just to give the right answer. And I think especially with like the AI tools that are coming out in coding, for instance, where you can just tab to get the answers. I think it is like going to be a challenge in future to get people to be comfortable in that sort of uncertainty zone, just because of how easy and how integrated these tools will be. And I think without it, it's going to be very challenging to learn at a rate that's going to be useful enough. Because the other thing that I think about is, as you said, things are changing very fast. But if you look at certain industries, there's a lot of knowledge that's been compounded over many, many years, right? So, for instance, someone who's trying to learn how to train a large language model, first of all, you need to know maths. You need to know like, how to do matrix multiplication. Then you need to know like the basics of, you know, neural networks, and you need to know how they connect together. You might need to know a little bit of Python, and it all kind of like layers on top of each other. And also, if you look at, the further spectrum of like fundamental physics, it's like, just to kind of push the boundary, there's so much learning that you need to know, just to start to like understand, things like quantum effects and all of that kind of stuff. And maybe that's where AI will play a part, because maybe at some stage you will need to go lower down the stack, but you might be able to do at least most of the stack with some sort of AI tool, right? So that you don't have to learn from the basics of like, Newtonian or Einstein physics all the way up to like quantum, right? Because there's like a lot of stuff that you kind of need to know, and lots of steps that will maybe take you, or maybe it won't be needed, because maybe you need a new insight in order to make a leap to a different kind of area, right?
I agree with you in principle. It's I think AI is one of those interesting ones where I'm not entirely sure where we're going and if there is a ceiling that we're going to hit sometime soon. I somehow don't think so. I think that the models are going to just carry on getting
Mm,
smarter and smarter. And so it may actually be the case that there are certain problems that humans won't necessarily have to learn
mm,
about in the future, in the same way that like it's useful for you to be able to do, multiplication on a piece of paper. But it's not necessary anymore,
mm,
right? You can always refer to a calculator, and like there's nothing wrong with not doing multiplication by hand,
mm,
right? It is important to understand how multiplication works, and I don't know if figuring it out by hand does in fact give you a deeper understanding of it, or maybe
mm.
it does. I think it does to
Yeah.
a certain extent, but like I don't know. I don't know.
I guess, yeah, like, because I mean, like, sometimes, like, the maths, like, the way that your teacher might have taught you how to do it is just like, there's certain like rules, like when you're doing certain multiplications, there's like rules of like, oh, you just do this and you plus them together and then you get the result.
Mm.
And you're not really saying, well, on a like infinite plane, when you've got like three vertices and you're trying to like intersect them, that's like going to be a line. You're not like, there's kind of different dimensions of how you can formulate like knowledge. And I guess maybe AI will kind of abstract a lot of it for you, and then you would just be able to work on this sort of like abstraction level.
So I think that there's something else over there that needs to be said. So let's say, for instance, we manage to build a AI that's really good at teaching people things.
Mm,
One theme that I've seen repeated over and over again is that some people have like a teacher who inspired them, right? The
mm,
teacher's like got them really interested in mathematics or science or whatever. And I don't know if that is something that an AI can do. Like, I don't know if an AI can inspire or hold a person accountable without some
mm,
additional um without some additional checks and balances. So it's like I don't want my Spanish teacher to be disappointed with me when we next meet up because I said I would, practice these
mm,
tenses, right? Um, but if it's an AI and it says, well, did you practice your tenses? And then I say no, and then it says, well, I'm very disappointed with you. Like, I
mm.
really won't care, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that there is something else that's very special about in-person learning in that there is that human aspect of not wanting to disappoint and
Mm,
accountability and inspiration. that
Mm.
YouTube videos or an AI for that matter just can't
Mm.
really get.
Yeah, and maybe more on that thread is there is the inspiration being lost? Because sometimes there are in well, it seems like there are industries where people are becoming less interested in those areas, right? Maybe because of it being too boring, or it's the return on investment in terms of learning. Engineering is not as much as just being like a TikTok influencer, right? Is there like a loss of inspiration in like becoming a plumber or becoming like an electrician? And we were talking before this about how there's going to be like a lack of skills in the marketplace because people just are, I mean, even in the medical industry, like doctors and nurses in the UK specifically, like they get treated like shit, they get paid like shit, and like people expect the world of them. Is that going to just be like something that no one's inspired to do it and no one's going to do it? Maybe you'll get one or two like sort of good Samaritans who want to like just do it because it feels good, or you'll get like the
Hmm.
Indian people
Hmm.
who like their parents tell them to become doctors, but like it's not going to be something that people are inspired to do or learn.
I I think that, this is going to sound very, very pro-market capitalism of me, but I do think that the market will correct for these
Mm,
things. And we're already seeing something like that in the United States, in that like tradies,
mm,
your plumbers and your welders and your electricians and stuff, they are now getting to the point where they are competitive in terms of salary to someone with a university
mm,
degree, right? And that has historically never been the
yeah.
case, right? So there is this correction
Mm,
happening, and you're seeing a lot more people deciding to not go to
mm,
university and instead go into the trades because you can get an apprenticeship and start working within 6 months to a year, as opposed to going through 3 to 4 years of university, excluding
mm,
postgrad. Right. And so I think that doctors and teachers will follow the same track, but because they're so much more regulated and there's a specific career track that you
mm,
go on, it's going to be very, very
mm,
slow. So, for instance, a doctor only, when someone leaves high school, it takes them 7 to 9 years to become a qualified medical professional. That's when they can start practicing. And so that's a very, very slow process. But I do think that doctors are going to become better paid and more in demand, and nurses for that matter as well. I think that unfortunately for nurses and teachers, there isn't as big of a barrier to entry. And so you can have the market flooded with teachers, with teachers coming out of university, and there's just not enough market demand for teachers, and it keeps prices low. And so I guess that's the whole like skilled labor
yeah.
problem with the economies, with economies in general, is that, we really want like skilled teachers, but the markets also want to pay teachers as little as possible.
Yeah, I guess it's like there's a lot of market inefficiencies there because it's like, yeah, I it just seems to be like a very underpaid job, and there's always a demand for more teachers, and it's kind of obvious in every scenario that education is important. Um, and yeah, I guess maybe that is a limiting factor, is that having a person to inspire is almost going to be the more important factor when it comes to teaching kids or youngsters how to do things. Because yeah, I think I'm with you where having an AI teach people in a distributed manner, where you just plop your kid in front of like a computer and then they're just learning on like like on a laptop and swiping and stuff.
Yeah, it's not going to go
Yeah, it's only
anywhere.
going to get you so far. But maybe then also having things like YouTubers or influencers who are inspiring in a sense, they have some influence.
So like a combination of an inspiring force from like the influencer side, and then a um have like a facilitator who isn't necessarily skilled in the craft, but
Yeah.
is there to have that like human-based keeping you at it. It's like, did you finish your homework?
Or just, yeah, like helping you acquire the skills needed to do that thing faster, right? And maybe that's where the AI steps in. It's like, oh, I want to do this. Like, how do I do this in the quickest way possible? Um,
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. So,
I
just
mean,
to end off over here, what are some of the things that you're looking to learn over the next year or so?
so I've been looking, yeah, so I've been learning a lot about the climate tech space because I've been doing this accelerator thing to have some impact there. So I've been learning quite a lot about the whole sort of gamut of technologies that are part of it, like the like batteries and grid technologies and agri-tech and all these stuff. And
Your solars, your winds, your storage.
yeah, and that's part of why I wanted to speak about it is because it's kind of like I've been going very broad, and also being a generalist in my previous job, it's kind of very easy for me to go very general and just try and get like the sense of the space first, and it's also more like feeling out where I'm drawn to, where I'm excited to go and spend more time because I think, as you said, like it's important that you feel inspired or like at least drawn into that thing that you're learning, because that will also propel you to learn deeper and go further in and like uncover things. But it's been very broad at the moment, and just trying to sort of chat to people, ask people about like what's industry interesting in the space that they're working in, like how they think about the future and all those kind of things. So it's that's one thing. Um, I've been learning. Well, I went to a DJ lesson, so I'm trying to learn something that's a bit more tangible.
Very
I
nice.
might,
Emma's also been learning how to DJ.
yeah, exactly. So it's something like that, and it was also like quite inspiring in a way because it's something that I haven't done, but I've always kind of wanted to do. And then having done it, I realized like why haven't I done it sooner, kind of thing. So it's like something that's quite easy to learn. Similar when I think when we did that sailing course, it was like I've never done a sailing course. I learned how to sail, and that was really
That's
like
actually a really good example of that. It's a week long, you're on the boat every single day,
yeah, and you're just thrown into it,
redoing the knots and the
and you just like
yeah.
kind of learn it. And you're like, oh, well, that wasn't that hard. Like all those times that
And you couldn't have learned it on YouTube.
exactly. It's like something that's really physical. But yeah, those are the things I've been learning. I don't know what you've trying to learn. I think you've obviously wrote the blog about it. So is there any other crafts that you planning to learn?
Yeah, so I think the main one that I'm going to be focusing on in 2025 is just, your proper deep mechanics, how engines work. Like I've got a pretty good understanding of how engines work, but I would be very hard pressed to figure out how to um, get the timing right for a points-based system on a old Honda, right?
Mm,
So there's a lot of like getting your hands greasy that I need to do.
mm,
I've done the context and the
yeah,
what is possible and learned all the jargon. And now I actually have to do the part where I get my hands really greasy and just properly figure it out. And conveniently enough, my brother's been in the process of rebuilding a 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle. And so this
mm,
past weekend, we did a whole bunch of dry firing the engine in the workshop, getting
mm,
everything running nicely, and then carting the engine to the car and some back-breaking labor, getting a 250 to 300 kg engine
yeah.
seated. But really satisfying and rewarding.
Mm.
So
I think that's the main thing is like just being uh open to learn and almost finding. I think what we both have in common is we've found that like enjoyment from learning. And I think some people just see it as like a means to an end. So I have to like learn this thing. But if you get involved in the process and you like really like sort of zone into like it's going to improve yourself, it's going to improve your ability to earn money potentially, it's going to you know open up your brain
yeah.
to new possibilities, and it's definitely
And
something.
arguably to prevent you from stagnating as an old person.
That's another factor is like as we're getting into our sort of 30s, it's becoming, you don't want to be one of these old guys you're like, oh, this is how we've always been doing it. It's like you want to be
Yeah.
able to at least adapt, although I do wonder if I'd be able to think at the speed of like some of the 18 to 20-year olds that are coming out now, because they seem to think on like a different frequency, because people say that they can't even watch the YouTube videos anymore. It's like it has to be so like quick, responsive.
Mm.
But
I mean, that's a whole other discussion that we can have at another point. But I definitely found that the brief foray that I did into TikTok,
yeah,
I lost the ability for a while to read books or even watch longer YouTube
yeah,
videos. It's crazy how quickly it rewires your brain to just need that like
oh
dopamine
yeah,
hit every single
yeah,
second.
for sure. But yeah, it's great.
But we'll talk about that
Yeah,
another
let's do that.
time.